Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, um, more than likely you will be referred to myself, and I would act as the liaison to facilitate whatever whatever your needs are, and moving forward. So it's a large responsibility. It's one that it takes a lot of time, and I'll be happy to talk about more here in a little bit. But I wanted to focus tonight on communication uh, with tribal communities. And I think I want to start by explaining briefly uh, how in most tribal nations in South Dakota, the differences in the types of communication that are necessary. So tribal leadership on reservations is not solely invested in elected officials. So just like communities that are off the reservation, tribal nations have leaders within our communities that aren't elected and hold positions of influence. Leaders such as holy men, leaders like activists, and we're very strong on our family centric organizations. So a lot of times you'll hear people say the word tiwahe. It means family, and then from the family it goes further out, and they'll talk about their bands and their tribes and nations, and we really have it broken down or in a hierarchy that begins with the family. In the family we say tiwahe, and that's where a lot of decisions are made. In our modern times, that's been a really difficult area to communicate because of all the situation that we live on. Families are scattered a little bit further because of schooling and work and things of that nature, but they still make it work. So it's still a very important part of communicating with tribal communities, is involving the families that live on those communities. I know that when my father was alive, he was my nacha, he was my teacher, he was my leader, he was my uh, uh, leader, I guess. So when we talk about things like leaders in our language, we say nacha. Nacha means leader, and we don't use the word chief very often because that is not a word in our language. So we use the word nacha to mean leader, and in American context, a lot of times they've used nachas and chief interchangeably, but it's really a lot not exactly the same, because there's different types of nacha. There's nachas of family, there's nachas of societies, there's nachas of religion. There's all these different types of leaders, and that's one of the things I wanted to focus on communication with in our tribal nations, is that we have different types of leaders just like any other community. Now, two of the most influential leadership roles that are in tribal nations is, number one, the tribal council and the tribal executives. Those are elected leadership positions, and those are the ones that most people will deal with in most cases regarding working on a government to government or corporation to government basis. But then you have other organizations such as treaty councils. A lot of people have probably heard of treaty councils, but don't fully understand treaty councils. So treaty councils oftentimes are individuals and respected tribal leaders and nachas in their respective tribes that have gained the knowledge and retain our traditional aspects of our traditional governance. So many people believe that tribal councils are governments that are formed to administer to reservations, while treaty councils are governments that were formed to administer to our government to government responsibility with the United States. So what that does is it helps lay the context of why government to government communication is so important for tribal nations. Tribal nations are sovereign governments. And as such, we believe that we have a direct communication between our government and the federal government, and that any other government or political subdivision of the United States isn't really don't have the jurisdiction to communicate with tribal governments. So you see that there's a bit of a barrier there, and we wouldn't want that on our reservation any more than we would want the federal government coming to our reservation and talking to one of uh, our tribal district councils or one of our tribal departments, because that is it's skipping that government to government relationship when you refer to a political subdivision in that government to government relationship. So I think it's the premise. It's the keystone in communicating with tribal governments is understanding that tribes are equal to federal governments in our conversation to each other. So entering into communications with political subdivisions tends to be a little bit tricky, and that's one of the main reasons why. And it gets even more so when we're talking about jurisdiction of tribal governments or reservation governments versus those of treaty governments. Because if we're talking about what's happening specifically on a reservation, a lot of people view that that's really the jurisdiction of tribal governments. But when we're talking about issues such as the Black Hills, then that jurisdiction falls under our treaty councils because it that jurisdiction is believed to rest in those councils. Now it gets even a little bit more difficult when you're talking about different tribal nations, because each reservation and each a group of people who live on a reservations uh, form their governments in different ways, and some may have formalized their treaty council, and some may not have. So then you get some tribal governments that are working good with their treaty councils, and some tribal governments where they don't even have a treaty council or acknowledge a treaty council. So what that does is it creates difficulty in understanding who you want to be talking to as a subject matter expert in those different jurisdictions. And it really becomes an issue when, say, the state government wants to contact a tribe about something that's happening in our traditional treaty territory, which the reservation government doesn't have jurisdiction over. And I can give you an example um, real quick. And one of those examples happened or can is has happened in the past, but it's been sorted out and not sorted out in a way, and that is hunting rights. So no matter what act that was created since the treaties, the Sioux people still reserve our hunting rights in our treaty territory. That's never been addressed but under any act other than the treaties. And even if it was, that act doesn't supersede the treaty. And that's by constitution. And this is why it's important to have treaty councils, because when you look at treaties in the United States Constitution, it clearly says that the treaties will be the supreme law of the land, and that every single judge will be held to the terms of those treaties. And this is why treaties are so important for tribal nations, and why communicating with a tribal nation can be difficult when trying to understand the jurisdiction between what we call an IRA, or an Indian Reorganization Act government, and a treaty government. I know it sounds tricky, but this is one of the reasons why you need a person in the know, and why people like our native leaders who are in this Zoom meeting are so important, because that communication can be easily navigated by individuals that are in the Zoom meeting, as well as many others. And the way I tell people, and I hate to make this association, but I always tell people, well, when you go to court, you can defend yourself, but the likelihood of success is much greater if you hire a lawyer. And when you're communicating with tribal nations, I think the same is true. Now, I wouldn't go hiring a lawyer to talk to tribal nations. I would hire a member of that tribal nation who knows what they're doing, who knows the different groups on the reservation, and knows how to navigate the political and traditional processes that happen on a reservation. And again, it's also just like any other community. There's different layers of government um, responsibility, and finding the right one is probably the most difficult part. And that's why it's helpful to have somebody who knows how to navigate that particular reservation or tribal government. Um, so we go into we went from what everybody in this Zoom probably is most familiar with, and that is the tribal governments that are responsible for administering to the reservation. And those typically have an executive group and a legislative group and a judicial group, just like the United States, although it probably differs, and most tribes don't have a bicameral legislative body. And and that the way that those laws and regulations are made are slightly different in legislative processes between different reservations, which is another reason why it's important to know. Now, I apologize if I'm boring people with technicalities of different reservations, but I think I'm trying not to go too much into the weeds, but I think it's important to know that every single tribal government runs their government in their own way. So some governments may have a well written out policy in regards to communications with their tribal government, and some may have a government or may not have a very well defined communication policy or a consultation policy. Sorry.
That's one
So
thing
I'm
real quick.
sorry.
That's one thing I wanted you to highlight is the difference between consultation versus communication with tribes.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point. So I think I can safely say that most tribal governments will view a consultation as a request for consent, whereas other communications is just that, an exchange of information. So and here's where one of the biggest cultural differences come in between tribal and non-tribal communication, and one of them is that that I've noticed is that in communication, when a non-tribal member speaks or someone from a non-tribal government talks, and they say, "Hey, we're going to do this," and the other party doesn't say anything, they don't show up for court, or they don't say anything, then that non-tribal party assumes that they can do it. They see a lack of response as acquiescence. Whereas in our culture, in Sioux culture, the a silence is the hardest no you can give somebody. So if somebody comes to a tribal government and says, "Hey, we're going to consult on this engineering project. What do you think?" And they're met with silence. So the government says, "Oh, okay, I guess we can do it." When in reality, for us, a silence is an absolute no. We don't do it. And in actuality, it's actually more polite than actually saying no. That's one of the small cultural differences in just navigating something as simple as acquiescence, as yes or no, consent, consultation versus communication. So it's a really good point that you brought up, Chante. And I don't know how much time I have. Uh,
I think, are we going for about an hour, Elena?
Yeah, but I wanted to make the first half hour me trying to give a good idea about how the difficulties
Mm-hmm.
of communicating with tribal nations, and then we'll kind of slide into what can we do, and then I'd really like to have a good solid 20 minutes of discussion of question and answer, and not just by me. I know that there are other members of tribal nations on here that I'm sure can give you some advice or point out situations that were successes and situations that were not. Um, I talked about the different, some of the different challenges in communicating with tribal nations. But let's talk about uh, real quick about how we can successfully communicate. And I'd like to start with tribal council. Again, that's the one concept everybody on the Zoom meeting is familiar with. Tribal councils, executives, and judicials. The bottom line is, if you want to speak to a tribal council, the best or to a tribal nation, the best thing to do is to call up the head of that tribal nation, that executive. It'll be either a chairman or a president of one of the tribal nations in South Dakota. You can look up their website. Some of us have better websites than others. And Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe just redid our website. So I would encourage people to go look up CheyenneRiverSiouxTribe.com and give that a look. And you'll see on there contact information for a bunch of different bodies. But the most important thing is to contact the executive of that tribal nation and be clear about what it is that you want to talk about. Because in some cases, you may not need to talk to the tribal chairman or the tribal president, but his staff that you're talking to could direct you to the appropriate either committee or executive or even department if it's something that doesn't require council action or anything like that. So that would be my first piece of advice. And then the second piece of advice: find somebody in the tribe who's willing to help you navigate who it is exactly in the tribe that you need to talk to. So in some cases, if I was let's say I was a rancher on one of the reservations, and I had a small parcel of land surrounded by tribal land, and I wanted to swap my land for land that was contiguous with my land on the edge of the reservation or whatever. Uh, I may just need to start that process through a BIE Realty office or a tribal land office, and contacting the tribal chairman's office or president's office would be a good place to start, and that person can help you navigate that process with no problem. But there's a myriad of different reasons why somebody would like to contact a tribe, and that was just one brief one. And then on a more traditional sense, when you're speaking to something, say a treaty council, that can be more difficult, especially in reservations that didn't formalize a treaty council. But if they don't have a formal treaty council, another good way is to contact one of the tribes that do have a formal treaty council and ask them, hey, who do I talk to on, contact Rosebud or Standing Rock. They both have formal treaty councils. Say, who do I need to talk to in Pine Ridge or in Cheyenne River in regards to treaty council? And they may help you navigate that, as well as in some cases, the chairman's and president's office can do that as well. But reaching out to a tribal government is easy as picking up the phone and conducting your business. Whereas the more traditional forms of government will require a little bit more tact, because normally people go up there and like Chante and I were talking about at the beginning of this video about opari, which is offering some tobacco, and it is a very formal and a proper way to address tribal elder or anybody in one of the Sioux nations if you're going to ask them to do something for you. It's a symbolic gesture, but it is one of commitment and or showing your commitment by sacrificing something for that individual. And that's really important too. So I can go into other different examples, but I'd like to move on and talk about some questions. And I didn't get the chance to look at the chat room while I was here, but I, um, I Don't know if anybody's posed any questions yet, but I know that.
Remi,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Remi, this is Dennis Olson from Huron. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join by video, but I'm so happy to be able to join you tonight. Very, very interesting and good presentation on the background and things that clarified things for me. I was wondering when you talk about the tribes and the setting their own things, it reminded me of the different tribes have done such a great job with the COVID and managing the COVID and protecting their people. And as part of that, we had that the thing where they're on the road and the governor got involved and she said over the weekend that it was going to be opened up and then it wasn't. But I take it, I don't know if you know any of the history about how that all shook out, but I take it must be because it comes down to ultimately it is the indigenous, it is their decision. It isn't the governor's.
Right. That first of all, Dennis, is good to hear from you, and thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. And you're right. And you're referring to particularly the checkpoint situation. Now, again, each tribal nation did their checkpoint situation differently, but I can tell you how it worked here on Cheyenne River. The bottom line is one of the things people don't realize in most governments. So tribal governments in South Dakota, is that the tribal government has full civil jurisdiction over everything within the exterior boundaries of the reservation. Everything. It doesn't matter whether you're a member or a non-member. The second thing to remember is that that the jurisdiction on the specifically on the highways has been fought in the past to a great degree, particularly by the Rosebud Sioux tribe and Yankton Sioux tribe, and the finding of all of that, how it hashed out in the courts, is that within the exterior boundaries of tribal reservations, the tribal governments have the authority on the roads, which is why in some reservations you will see highway patrol patrolling those roads, and they have an agreement with that tribe. And on other reservations like Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, you will not see a highway patrol officer on any of our roads because we don't have a formal agreement with the state of South Dakota for their highway patrol to patrol our roads. That doesn't mean that that our roads are totally without highway patrol presence, but what it means is that we don't have a formal agreement. And the reason, so what typically happens is, say there's a car accident, then the tribal police or the tribal government will reach out to the state or county and say, could you bring in your crash experts and help us sort out this investigation? And they typically do that investigation on the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. And we consider that a handshake agreement or a gentleman's agreement or a gentlewoman's agreement between two governments. And so there's no formal agreement. So, but other tribes do have MOUs in the way, especially when it comes to law enforcement with the highway patrol. But that's just an example of why it's important for people to understand that for so long, tribal governments were not respected as sovereign governments, and tribal governments were often overlooked in every aspect, from incident management and emergency management to civil and criminal jurisdiction. So what ends up happening is that the people who are constantly on those jurisdictions never really understand the full concept of tribal sovereignty and a jurisdiction over them. And so it was a shock to many people when they wanted to come on the reservation and they were either allowed to or not allowed to, simply because everybody had always done it. But as in the case that happened last summer in Oklahoma, just because someone does something all the time doesn't necessarily make it right. And that was the case in Oklahoma, and certainly is a surprise on everybody's face in that happened during this past pandemic. So that is an unfortunate circumstance that happened. And it was a great question, Dennis, and I really appreciate that. And I'm trying not to get too long-winded about it. So, but the result. Oh, I'm sorry. The conclusion of that was that the governor didn't file a lawsuit against the tribe because that lawsuit had already been done a long time ago. And so then the governor reached out to the administration and tried to put political pressure on the tribes in that respect. And in some cases, like in the Cheyenne Sioux tribe, the Cheyenne Sioux tribe actually filed a lawsuit against the president of the United States and the Bureau of Indian Affairs so that they would not intervene in some of the procedures that the tribe, the health procedures that the tribe was doing at the time. So, but at this point, that there's been no hearing. So, and I believe that case now with the new administration has been is in conclusion. So thanks for that question, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you.
Remi, I have a question.
Sure.
You spoke briefly about something that happened in Oklahoma last summer. Can you clarify what you mean by that and give more detail for people who might not be familiar with that situation?
Sure. And I'm not privy to the exact names on the docket, but I do know that what ended up happening was an individual was arrested for a criminal offense by the state in in Oklahoma, and it ended up being, I believe, federal charges. So as they were, the argument was by this individual that you arrested me on tribal reservation, on tribal land, so that this isn't the crime and the arrest wasn't legal because there's a different set of rules on reservations, and the state didn't consider that reservation. They said the tribe didn't own the land, so it's not reservation, because the land that was involved in the whole incident, to include the arrest, was private land. And so the fight went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, look, whether or not the status of the land is in fee, as in deeded land, or not, that land was still within the exterior boundaries of an existing reservation. Because the state government acted like that reservation was no longer in existence, doesn't mean that it's no longer in existence. And so everybody, to include the state, was surprised to find out that individual or that the land was still reservation land, and it ended up being more than just the area that person was arrested in, but in half the state. So it caused a waterfall of other investigations to be changed, and to look at other crimes to make sure that those crimes were not state crimes, and would they have been if they were federal or not. So so it really is an instance of a skeleton in the closet, one that exists to a great degree in the state of South Dakota. Because while reservations are done by an act of Congress, the treaties were also done by an act of Congress, and I could tell you with 100% certainty that every single Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota believes that the treaty supersedes any act of Congress, and we're willing to go to bat for it, and we're waiting for the opportunity to present itself so that we can prove that the acts of Congress were illegal. Now, if that's the case, then there's a possibility that the Black Hills could be returned and half the state of South Dakota could be returned. In practice, in theory, all it takes is a case like that to pop up and to cause those issues, which is one of the reasons why communicating with tribes is difficult with non-tribal governments, is because they don't, when you have somebody in Washington coming to South Dakota to talk to a tribal nation, or somebody who doesn't know in the state of South Dakota's government doesn't know what they're talking about, coming to talk to a tribal nation, they don't come with the knowledge. They don't come armed with the information that half of South Dakota is treaty territory. And they don't respect those tribal governments for that degree. So thank you for that.
Remi, I was going to let you know, it looks like there are a few questions in the chat area. And the first one from Erin Royer, I think, is a really good one. She's just wondering about the formality of meeting with tribal members, how to properly address them. Should it be, Mr., Miss, etc.? Is it appropriate to use the first name? Are there some things with that formality that you'd suggest to us?
Sure. Great question, Aaron. It's good to see you on here. I really appreciate your participation. And now we're talking more on an individual with individual members of different, I want to say tribes, but we're really not different tribes. It is a really good question. And the first thing that I would say is when you're talking to a person coming from one of the reservations or just any Native American tribe, we generally introduce ourselves as who we are, who our Tiwahe, our family is, who our Oshbaye, our band, what is our band, and what our Oyate is. And some tribes even go further. Like in my wife's tribe, when you introduce yourself as I am, this is who I am. My father and my mother, my mother and father on, they go back to say who my mother and father are and who their mother and fathers are. So it's really important to tell that person you're talking to who you are first. I think that's one of the things that people miss, is that they miss that in order to communicate effectively, the person you're talking to should know who they're talking to. So, when we introduce ourselves, a lot of times we'll say, my name is Remi Baldigal. I am Mini Koju. I am Titwan Oyate, which means I'm my name Baldigal. I come from which means I come from the Anukasa Hupecha Tiwahe, and my Oshpaye, my band, is the Mini Koju, the plants by the water. And that my tribe is the Titwan Oyate, which is those who live on the plains dwellers. And so when I introduce myself to another Lakota that way, they know exactly who they're talking to. And then the opposite will come out of them. So it's important for who you're talking to know who you are first. And then secondly, when you say that, you're inviting them to tell you who they are. So many times we don't like when you're talking to someone, someone may be indifferent to the term Indian because that's just a term they've been addressed by their whole lives. But the reality is most of us would like to be called by who we are, whether we're Lakotas, Nakotas, Dakotas, or whether we're Mini Koju, all of those are right. And so that's the simple way. Now, if you're learning the language even more, then you would call somebody by their family name. If I was talking to Faceparadigo, I could say Unchi. She's my, I give her the title of grandmother out of respect. And or if I'm talking to my uncle, I would say Lekshi. We call each other by our family position in our Tuwais normally, but casually to each other, it's okay to call each other by our first names and things of that nature, unless we're talking about about something more traditional. Then we want to do something like opari or give a tobacco or something like that to who we're talking to. Not always appropriate for children, but or not appropriate for children, but for adults when you're speaking to them. That would be appropriate. So I know that's a tough one. A lot of people will say, what do you prefer, Native American? Do you prefer first American or indigenous or Native American? I say, well, first of all, I'm Mini Koju, Lakota. So If you want to talk about me, say I'm a Lakota. That's it. Call me a Lakota. I'm a happy person. That's what I am. And it'd be like me calling you an American instead of a someone from another country who's over here, who came over here. So um, that's really the most important thing to do, is let people know who you are, and encourage them to say who they are, and keep that in mind when you're talking to them. So that's a great question, Aaron. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Is there any more questions?
Looks like there's another one in the chat if you want me to read it for you, from Steve, and I'm going to probably say the last name wrong, Ozumi. Sorry if I said that
Yeah,
wrong.
that's good.
At one time, I worked in a Fed state technology education data project. We did speak to the interior in DC at one point, but the project broke down. How might these type of data-driven projects, Fed state or both, approach tribes going forward? Should we ever be in a project again, such as this?
Yeah, great question. And one of the most common things that happen in government to government relationship with tribal nations is projects that start and then fall through the cracks. They just completely stop. And I think one of the biggest problems there is communication and method. So again, before you get started on any project on any tribal nation, and reservations differ from reservation to reservation, make sure that you're talking with a subject matter expert from that reservation, and preferably a member of that reservation to help you navigate what obstacles you may have. And I will tell you right now that the number one most important thing to starting and finishing a project with a tribal nation is to understand that you're talking to a sovereign government, and that if you want that project to be successful, engage that government in the project. Make sure that that government is hiring people from that reservation to do the work that you would like on the reservation, and make it clear from the beginning that what the product that government produces is theirs. It's not yours. If you're asking for data or anything like that, then understand that what happens within the exterior boundaries of a reservation belongs to that tribal government. And that when you engage a tribal government, and understand that it belongs to them, and that you're cooperating with them to share that information, you'll be more prone to success if the people who are performing those duties or responsibilities or project on the reservation are people who are from the reservation, living on a reservation, and working on a reservation. And everybody will win. It might be difficult to find the right skill set sometimes, but patience is key. And everybody will win in the end when that happens. So great question, Mr. Oizumi. I think it was a really a poignant issue when it comes to government communication.
It looks like we have another question from JP. He has his hand raised.
Remi, question for you, and I have some familiarity, having been born and raised here in South Dakota, with this, but the question is, I know that there is the tribal lands that were granted by treaty, which has been messed up many times over since then, but question is, can any of that land ever be sold out from the tribe? Do tribes ever sell land, or is it just the mess that the government goes and plays with tribal boundaries and with actually more with treaty boundaries, that cause some of the problems, like Oklahoma, like South Dakota, like many other states?
JP, great question. It's an honor to see you again. Thank you for participating today, and for all the work that you've done yourself. It is one of the greatest misunderstandings that affect communication between tribal and non-tribal governments and peoples is the issue of land. So most tribes have in their constitution that they cannot sell land. So once the land is in a tribal jurisdiction, that land is going to stay there. And the only way that land can be altered is by force of legislation or force of power of some sort. Now, secondly, you're right. There was the treaties had a much larger areas than reservations are on now, and it was acts of Congress that have delineated the reservation boundaries now. And your question was more focused on, can that land be returned, and how, or can it be sold out from underneath tribes? And again, there is some legal precedence about what you're talking about, and a whole lot of opinion. But I can tell you this, is that the Supreme Court has already come down with the decision that what the United States did in taking the Black Hills was wrong, and that the federal government needs to compensate the Great Sioux Nation for that travesty. However, the Supreme, however, that is not agreed to by the Great Sioux Nation, which is the reason why, docket 70, or is it 74? Maybe Faith can correct me on this one. Came out and said was never accepted by any of the Sioux tribes because it's not, one, it wasn't anywhere. There's no justification. There's no just compensation for the loss of our sacred land. And two, it shows the commitment of tribal governments and treaty councils and the people in general, in that what is more important for us as people, the money or this earth. And I think it's a clear example as to why they didn't take that money. Secondly, when you look at how much of that land today is not in private ownership. So there is a lot of that land that is that is managed by the federal government, that is owned by the federal government. And so can that land be easily given back? Yeah. I mean, nobody's living there. I mean, it's federal land. So the difference is changing that from federal land to tribal land, and let it be tribally managed instead of federally managed. And then the Indian Self-Determination Act can help tribes set up for success in the management of that land. It's a concept. It can happen, and it should happen. Things that happened recently, for instance, the selling of the railroad land between Wall and Rapid City by the state of South Dakota, was land that was taken for the purpose of infrastructure. That land doesn't exist for the purpose of infrastructure anymore, yet the state of South Dakota sold that land to a private company. So that land is not even in public domain anymore. And that is a good example of what you're talking about, JP, when it comes to selling that land that still is treaty land and sold out from underneath the tribe. So, and had somebody been there involved in that process who understood that, then this wouldn't become a problem when tribal government and state governments try to come to the table and communicate with each other, because those travesties don't go away. They're still there, and they do affect communications. So great question, JP. Thank you for that. And best I could do is give you some examples and help people understand a little bit better that precarious situation and how it pertains to government to government communications. Any other questions? I think we're probably getting close to our 1 hour. I don't want to, when I first started public speaking, I had a tough time getting started, but now I have a tough time stopping. So if somebody can help me wrap it up here.
Remi, do you want to take one last one? We've got one more in the chat, and it's from Mike Huber. It says, Is there any plan for a group to visit Bison Ranch recently publicized in Rosebud? On this note, is there a vision for many more ranches like this with thousands of bison?
Yeah, great question. And believe it or not, almost every reservation already has a significant herd of bison on it. So, and do we want to make more? Yes. That's definitely something we encourage. And I know, speaking from personal experience, I grew up on a small ranch in the middle of southwestern portion of our reservation, a very remote area. And it was always my father's dream to see buffalo again on the reservation, roaming uh, through our people. Because we honestly believe that as long as there's a buffalo or a bison nation, there's going to be Lakotas. And so to us, we don't we almost see us as one and the same. And so it is important uh, for that to be in our on our reservations, on our land, and amongst our people. So that's a good question. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that.
And so we'll leave our last question for the best person, your wife, Elena. Have any more questions from anyone else before we finish with Elena? Go ahead, Elena.
Yes, Remi, I had a question about, I guess from us as Democrats and the Democratic Party. What can we do as Democrats to more efficiently connect and communicate with tribes in South Dakota?
Great, great question. And one of the things I have to say is hats off to the Democratic Party of South Dakota. I am so proud of you because of the effort that's being made to do the most important thing there is to do, and that is make the space and to communicate with the people from the different reservations. The Oceti Sakowin Caucus has been really instrumental and important in getting some of the movers and shakers from different reservations together, and it's going to continue to grow, and I hope it does, so that we get more people involved. And I commend everybody who's part of the South Dakota Democratic Party for creating that space. And it's been a privilege to see the party grow. And I'll tell you, there are no more staunch Democratic citadels in the state of South Dakota than the reservation. We understand the importance the importance of human dignity, the importance of our land. We understand that natural law can only be superseded by the laws of man for so long before the consequences happen, and we hope that we survive those. And I think we share those common goals with the South Dakota Democratic Party, which is why I'm so enthusiastic about being part of it. And it's important to build off of that foundation that we have on reservations and see all the work that we can do together to make this party better. And I really look forward to seeing what the party's going to do next. I want to, I was talking with my wife earlier, and we were saying we need more caucuses. We need a veteran caucus. We need a labor caucus. We need all of these other things, and let's do it. Let's do it. And I'm like, well, hold on. Let's put the ship we're on sail now, and we'll continue to contribute to the party as much as possible. And so the importance of communicating with reservations is immense. We're here. We're ready to participate. Allow us to. And that happens when you engage like the South Dakota Democratic Party has been, by engaging with leaders from the community. And you've done a great job so far. I commend Randy Seiler for his leadership. I commend Nikki Groundley for hers, and Chante and Sid and everybody has done a really great job of organizing and getting out there. Another name I want to talk about is Kellen returns from Scout. He has done a great job. Faith Spotted Eagle on here has, Jacob Eastman has from Sisitwa, and of course, lastly, my lovely, beautiful, talented wife who's doing her best to contribute to the South Dakota Democratic Party as well. That's what it takes. You're doing what you need to do. You're giving us space. You're allowing us to participate and understanding that the concept of mitaku oyasin, and that is we're all related. And when we start thinking like that and start acting like that, then we can start being united and participating together, and hopefully turning this red state blue. So I commend you all, and thank you. And I guess on that, I would love to say, thank you for joining me here today. I hope you come back for another wonderful presentation by the South Dakota Democratic Party on these progressive issues. And and if there's anything I could do for anybody, please don't hesitate to reach out. If I can help you make your program better, or if I can help you communicate with a tribal nation or individuals, do not hesitate to reach out to the party. There's a lot of talented tribal leaders who are involved in the party who can help you navigate those difficult communication barriers. So thank you. And it's great to see you all again. And I hope to see everybody again at some point down the road. Have a good night.
For joining us, everyone, and for our meetings next Tuesday. We'll be having progressive. It's not Progressive Tuesday, but it's sponsored by the Oceti Sakowin Caucus. Every Tuesday, we'll be having these conversations with different speakers, and it doesn't only pertain to Native issues. It pertains to all democratic issues and those who all support each other in this state. And so we want to thank all of you for joining us today. I wanted to acknowledge one of our fearless leaders in the crowd, one of my Tui, Faith Spotted Eagle, and also my Mashke Ali Moran. I see, hello, Auntie Faith. Do you want to end us with some good words? Also, I see Muffy and Philippa in there, Lynn Hart, all of our colleagues, but want to finish us off with some good words, Tui.
Well, when I was growing up from other elders, and all of a sudden I blink my eyes and I'm an elder, but they always told me that the goal in life was to be good to listen to. So Remi, you passed the test. You were good to listen to. But thank you, all of you. It's very inspiring to come together like this. Yuwita in our language is like it's reminiscent of a nest to come together. So I envision this nest of blue, which is very, very essential in our future. And those little ones that are in the nest that aren't even hatched yet, we really need to prepare for them. It's an obligation, a responsibility, and it can be done. So I'm pretty excited about this circle. That's all I got. Wopida, hugs and love.
Thank you, Tui, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you, Remi.